are a little late getting on the air. Sorry about that, but we're getting our ducks in a row here. Go ahead and open up your Bibles tonight to 2 Kings. 2 Kings. We're going to be starting chapter 2 and 3. Sam, are you the only one from Ponca that came over? I sure enjoyed your granddaughter and Abby and Ethan, is that right? And it's Brittany is her name. And they talked like they'd come back, so that's really good. Good. I'm glad that they were here. If you were here, did you enjoy Family Fun Sunday? Wasn't that cool? Showing we had 141. I don't think that is as much as last year, but we had a lot of families, and as of right now, we've got several that are saying they will come to the preacher's breakfast Sunday morning. So we're really excited about that, encouraged that we have an opportunity to share more about the church and share the gospel with them. Speaking of sharing the gospel, I know that for those of you who were in coach's class, if you were in the multi-purpose room, how many of you were in the multi-purpose room for the class Sunday morning? Did you feel that was a good thing the way Coach put that together as far as for first-time attenders? Obviously, probably nothing that, well, you probably learned a few things about why church attendance is good. Did y'all know it reduces, what? Did you know it reduced stress? Was that one of the points? Yeah. And gives you a place to have belonging, togetherness, and volunteering. Did you enjoy the video interviews we had? Especially with Rhett picking his nose. We've already talked about that. Yeah, there's you ain't seen nothing yet. There's obviously some things that we're kind of, Coach and I got a little plan. We're going to release it in steps and stages. And probably do more videoing, because that was good enough. I'd like to get around to some of the others. Now, in here we had a lot of fun, because I taught some Bible stuff using the form of magic. And since y'all weren't in here, and I already kind of warmed you up last week with a little rope trick, I got another little rope trick, but I need 2 volunteers. How about David and Lee? Would y'all volunteer? Now, inspect these ropes, and I'll teach you a lesson with it, but make sure there's no mirrors, magnets, or trap doors. Does that seem like a pretty fair piece of rope right there? I mean, you wouldn't tow a trailer with it, but would it tie down something? Stringer for all the fish you'd catch, right? What's it smell like? Well, you'd think it smelled like cinnamon, I guess, but it doesn't. Well, because my hands were cooking on. You like that? Okay. Now we're going to have you inspect. I have 3 beads. I'm glad you came up here too, because I need your help, okay? These are wooden beads. Take one, take one, take one. Just make sure that it's wood, it's solid, except for there's a hole in the middle of it. Really kind of neat. Kind of reminds me of eating olives. I always like to put the olives on my fingers, you know. Okay, so does it measure up? It seems to measure up, right? Okay, what color do you have? Green. What color do you have? Black. What color do you have? Red. And let's turn this way, because the camera and everybody at home is watching from the camera. What color is this? Red. Red, that's very good, yes. Now, all these colors will represent something. Now, this color here represents all of humanity. This is a color that has a lot of, it talks about people. It's self, sometimes negative things, selfish things, kind of like greed, jealousy, envy. That's all represented by green. But it's God's creation, and we're made in His image. Now, red, you got the best one. That represents God. Put that bead up high in the air. And say, this represents God. Very good. Now, God is love. Love comes from the heart. And, of course, that's red, so it's the love of God, right? You got the worst beat of all. This is the black sin bead. This is what happens to our lives. Our hearts were blackened by sin, and it's no good. So I want you to say to him, you're no good. He already knew that, but that's okay. Now, I'm going to take this bead first and go ahead. Well, you do it. I'm going to have you go ahead and string these two through the center. And these ropes that you inspected, they represent our life, okay? They represent, did you lose the bead? Go chasing the bead. This trick might have to be put on pause. Okay. Oh, we're good. Okay. So we get hung up on sin, don't we? Now, one thing I'll just do here right quick, I'm going to tie a big old knot in this so we can demonstrate how we get really locked in on sin like that so it doesn't move. We get tangled up with sin, things that we say, things that we do, how we think, our attitudes. And let's put your red bead on this side. Can you put those two ropes in there? Very good. Give him a hand. He's doing such a good job. And let's then turn this around, and let's put these two through on the... Now, you remember what the green represents, right? Humankind. And you remember what the red represents? God. And you remember what the black represents? You. See how sin gets in the way of our relationship with God. And this is where we find the scripture, Isaiah 59, verse 2, that says, your iniquities, that's a big word for sin, have separated you from your God, and he has hidden his face from you. However, I'm going to have you hold on with firm grip too, right here, firm grip, and you, firm grip on this side. And I'd like for you, I want you to take this silk and show people who's on it. Do you know who's on that silk? Show the people. That's Jesus, that's right. And what did Jesus come to do? He came to die, right, on the cross, and he is a covering of our sin. He covers our sins up. So I'd like for you to put that silk, that handkerchief, right over the rope, over the black, okay? We're going to count to three. I'm going to have you count to three. On the count of his three, would y'all pull really tight, please?
Yep. Say 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I'll do that again. We're going to count to three like 1, 2, 3, okay? And when he says three, y'all pull real tight. And now sin is removed, and now we can be close to God. Young, sit down. Thank you. Isaac did an excellent job, don't you think? All right. So that's some of what you missed on Sunday morning in here when we were teaching kids. I don't remember if they applauded, and I like to say there's two ways of doing this trick. One is with applause, and the other is the way we're doing it now. Okay, to our session 14. This is 2 Kings, chapters 2 and 3. And I had several working titles, and I narrowed it down, and there's two really kind of cool things that happen, all in chapter 2. What are we doing over there? Swatting flies? Oh, okay. Well, I'm just seeing this. I couldn't decide which of the two, so this is called Up, Up, and Away, and Don't Poke the Bears, okay? If you read ahead, you kind of know where this is going. All right, let's look at this. We're going to summarize chapter 2 first. God has decided to take Elijah to heaven. That is a rare event, wouldn't you think? Trivia. How many people did God ever take straight to heaven? Two. Well, I guess you could say Jesus, but going to heaven without dying is 2. Okay, Elijah and Elisha, his student, you might say, are traveling together from Gilgal. Elijah tells Elisha, stay put right here, because God's calling me to Bethel. And Elisha says what? Oh, look at verse 2. Let's read verse 2 together. It says, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I will not leave you. So they went down to Bethel together, okay? Now, there was a company of prophets that had come out of Bethel, and all we're told in the text is they come up to Elisha, and they say, do you know the Lord is going to take your master from you today? And Elisha replies, this is the ending of verse 3, yes, I know, so be quiet. So he doesn't want anybody to bring it up. This happens again. Elijah tells Elisha to stay put because God now was sending him to Jericho. Again, Elisha doesn't want to stay put. He wants to go. Where you go, I'm going to go, as surely as the Lord lives. And there's a company of prophets that come out of Jericho. And they also say to Elisha, don't you know that God's going to take your master today? And he says, yeah, I know. Be quiet about it. And a third time, Elijah tells Elisha to stay put because God was now sending him to Jordan, the Jordan River. And a third time, Elisha gives the same reply. I'm going to, as surely as the Lord lives, I will not leave you. As you live, and they both go on. Okay, now, there are 50 in a company of prophets that are, and the way I read the text, standing at a distance, probably across the other side of the river, okay? They come up to the river, and they're watching Elijah and Elisha. They're watching from afar. And Elijah takes his cloak, he rolls it up, and he strikes the water with it. And what happens? It divides the water, and those two will cross on dry ground. Did y'all know that happened? I mean, you knew that the Red Sea divided, and you know the Jordan has divided before, right? Did you know that it had divided here? I mean, before you read the lesson tonight. And that's interesting. They cross over. And then Elijah begins to speak to Elisha. This is chapter 2, verses 9 and 10. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you? Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit, Elisha replied. You have asked a difficult thing, Elijah said. Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, it will not. Kind of interesting, wasn't it? While they're walking and talking, a chariot of fire, I just feel like you have to say it that way. A chariot of fire comes through and separates the two. Are you ready to rumble? Okay, sorry, I got carried away. Separates the two. Oh yeah, chariots of fire. I got it now. Da, 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 da. Okay. And a whirlwind takes up Elijah. It says to heaven. How many of you thought he went up in the chariot of fire? I used to think that, and I think I've seen pictures, but it doesn't say the chariot of fire took him up, but a whirlwind. You know, I'm not saying that it didn't happen, that he got on the chariot and then the whirlwind took him up. But we don't know that for sure. But a whirlwind takes him up. That we know for sure. Okay? Elisha reacts, verse 12. My father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. Okay? And Elisha picks up Elijah's cloak and he goes back over to the Jordan. What's he going to do? He's going to do what his master did. He strikes the water and says, and this is verse 14, where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? He asked. And when he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. Now the company of the prophets from Jericho who were watching said, the spirit of Elijah is resting on Elisha. And they went to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. Look, they said, we your servants have 50 able men. Let them go look for your master. Perhaps the Spirit of the Lord has picked him up and set him down on some mountain or in some valley. And Elisha says, no, don't send them. But they keep insisting, so he allowed them to go searching. And how long did they search? 3 days. And you always feel like you have to say 3 days and 3 nights. And they don't find him. To which Elisha says what? Yeah, told you so. Right, didn't I tell you? You know. All right. Next, Elisha helps a town that has a bad water problem. I need Elisha to come to this town. By having them bring him a bowl with salt in it, and he goes with a spring, throws it in, and says, verse 21, this is what the Lord says, I have healed this water, never again will it cause death or make the land unproductive. And the water remained pure to that day, according to the word Elisha had spoken. When Elisha was walking to Bethel, some boys were making fun of Elisha's bald head and were saying, get out of here, baldy. And Elisha called down a curse on them, and then 2 bears came out and mauled 42 of them. Then he traveled to Mount Carmel and then on to Samaria. That's chapter 2. Was that exciting? It's kind of a lot going on there. Let's go ahead and summarize chapter 3, and then we'll come back and look at things to ponder. All right, Joram had become king of Israel and Samaria. This is in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. Joram will reign 12 years. His reign is summed up kind of, what we sometimes see is after we hear all about Joram, then it will say, here's how that was looked upon. He's kind of got a little bit more into this story, but you have the summation before he gets to the end of his life. His reign is summed up as follows. This is verses 2 and 3. It says he did evil in the eyes of the Lord, but not as his father and mother had done. He got rid of the sacred stone of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit. He did not turn away from them. So, bad is the summation. Bad king. But not as bad as, his father. Kind of reminds me of something that I know some of you have heard me talk about. The guy the preacher who was approached to do a funeral for the town scoundrel, Have y'all heard this story more than twice? Because I get to tell them 3 times. And of course, everybody in town knew that this guy was no good. But the preacher was kind of tempted because the brother of the guy who was paying the preacher to do his brother's funeral, that was a scoundrel, he said, I'll offer you $1,000 to give to your church. So the preacher really wanted to kind of see what he could do to make that go. And he finally got to the point where when the day came for the service, what he thought of to say was, well, we all know what this guy was, what he did, his reputation. He was bad. He was bad. The brother, by the way, wanted to say that he was a saint, but he just couldn't feel in his conscience he could say that. But what he ended up saying was there at the end, but compared to his brother, he was a saint. So, yeah, he was bad, but compared to his dad, not as bad. So that's kind of the summation we get out of Joram. Okay, Mesha, king of Moab, raised sheep and had to pay a tribute to the king of Israel, which totaled 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. He only did this so Ahab died, and then he quit. He rebels. Well, the king of Israel, Joram, wants to go up against him, but he gets smart about it, and he decides, I better not do this by myself, and he goes and summons Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, to help him. We also know that the king of Edom got on board with this, so there's 3 allied kings. Jehoshaphat's statement to Joram is there at the end of verse 7. I will go with you, he replied. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. They talk about the plan, how they're going to attack, and the king of Edom also joins them, and they set out marching for 7 days, but they run out of water. Verse 10. What? Exclaimed the king of Israel. Has the Lord called us 3 kings together only to deliver us into the hands of Moab? Jehoshaphat asked this question. This is verse 11. Is there no prophet of the Lord here through whom we may inquire of the Lord? An officer of the king of Israel answered, Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here. He used to pour water on the hands of Elijah. Okay, that was his reply. And Elisha's name's brought up, and all 3 decide they're going to make a visit to Elisha. Here's the dialogue, beginning in verse 13. Elisha said to the king of Israel, why do you want to involve me? Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. I think this is interesting for the point. I want to pause here just to say interesting, because I think it's at this point we realize Elisha is being kind of sarcastic, isn't he? Why don't you go inquire who your father would have inquired? Because remember, when he went and inquired of, what was that guy's name? Something B-Bub. I was calling him Bubba last week. Well, you go back and why don't you ask them? Is it because there's no God in Israel that you went and inquired that God, you know? So again, it's a little taunting going on here, okay? A little taunting. So he, let's see, 13. Go to the prophets of your own. And the king said, no, because it was the Lord who called us 3 kings together to deliver us into the hands of Moab. What Joram is trying to make the case of is, there's no way that I and Jehoshaphat and this king of Edom would have ever gotten together unless God's hand had been in it. He's got a point there. You know, he's got a pretty good point there, and it kind of makes Elisha, I think, realize, okay, maybe this is a God thing. So, verse 14 is his reply. As surely as the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, if I did not have respect for the presence of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, I would not pay any attention to you, but now bring me a harvest. So there's something about the credibility of Jehoshaphat that Elisha feels like, okay, I'll give a little credibility to this. Maybe this is a God thing. But it's only because out of respect of Jehoshaphat. It has nothing to do with you, okay? And so the harpist begins playing, and the hand of the Lord came on Elisha. That's ending of verse 15. And then he prophesies. This is what the Lord says. I will fill this valley with pools of water. For this is what the Lord says. You will see neither wind nor rain, yet this valley will be filled with water, and you, your cattle, your other animals will drink. This is an easy thing in the eyes of the Lord. He will also deliver Moab into your hands. You will overthrow every fortified city, every major town. You will cut down every good tree, stop up all the springs, and ruin every good field with stones. I love this. I love this part where he says, verse 18, this is my favorite. This is probably my favorite part of this whole 2 chapters. This is an easy thing for the Lord. Now think about this. We have a verse in the New Testament. I'm going to kind of get a little expounding here, but with men this is impossible, but not with God, for with God what? All things are possible. I know this. You know this. We've heard this a lot. Nothing is too difficult for God to do. God can be unstoppable. He's unfathomable. He's indescribable. What else does that song say? He's awesome. Our God is an awesome God. Amen? That's right. All right. Preach it, right? But the way that it's put here is like so fresh and refreshing, because we say, okay, nothing's too difficult for him to do, is the same thing as saying it's easy for the Lord to do this. Wouldn't you agree that's the same? But this is the first time, or one of, I don't know, it may be the only time, I haven't really Googled this, but this is the first time it's put this way. It's easy. You know, we would maybe think, oh, it's nothing for God to do this. But have you ever thought about the fact that whatever difficulty or troubled situation you find yourself in, no matter how up against the odds you think you are, that for God, it's a snap, it's easy. And you might think, how in the world would God ever do that, or could do that, or what's got to happen for that all to fall in place and God pull that off? That's not too difficult for God. And I'm going to stand on a soapbox for a little bit, okay? For 10 seconds. I get the feeling sometimes some of my Christian friends, God love them, who thinks God needed a little bit more time than a 24-hour period to create this world, thinks that God would have needed that. And I'm thinking, no, not my God. Let there be light. Boom, there's light. Now, are you with me? Are you with me? You might think, well, wait a minute, but science shows and this, and it may not make sense, but God's in charge. And it's easy. It's easy. Don't think, too, that, well, 6 days and he got really tuckered out and had to rest. Rest meant pause. It didn't mean that he needed to take a nap. It meant that he stopped to the creating thing. He rested, meaning it's like in music. You sing this note, you sing this note, you sing this note, and there's a thing called a rest. What do? Not sing any notes here. But guess what you're going to do? When the measure continues, there's a note coming. That's my God. Okay? It's easy. Jeff, is some things difficult for you? It's easy with God. Larry, you ever have a difficult customer come into Napa and it tries your patience? You're thinking, God, how are you going to get me through the day? God says it's easy. You're thinking, yeah, right, but to God it's easy. It's easy. Okay. Sorry, I went more than 10 seconds on that soapbox, didn't I? I said I wouldn't do that. Where was I? I got lost. I was chasing a rabbit. Point 18. Or verse 18. Let's see if we remember. The harpist. The harpist was playing, and Elisha prophesied. Okay, and he prophesied. Yeah, we got through that, through 19. The next morning, water began to flow. Oh, and by the way, what makes this interesting? It's not a result of rain, is it? This area fills up with water. And it says it flowed from Edom and filled the land. It came out of nowhere. And all the Moabites had heard that the 3 allied kings had come to fight against them. So they're ringing the alarm. Every man who could bear arms was called up and stationed at the border. And when they got up early in the morning, they get up and look out across that water, and the sun reflected in such a way, and you've seen this before. We've had some beautiful sunrises, by the way, and some sunsets too this time of year. But it cast a red glow on that water surface, and it made it appear that it was what? Blood. And so they think, They all turned on each other and slaughtered each other. Let's go get the plunder, Moab. And so they march forward, and they're trying to get that plunder. Verse 23 says, those kings must have fought and slaughtered each other now to the plunder Moab. When Moab entered the Israelite camp, the Israelites rose up and said, ha, 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 it was a trick. And the Israelites rose up against them and slaughtered them. They chased them out. They destroyed the Moabite towns. They threw stones on their fields, stopped up all their springs, and cut down every good tree. Just like Elisha said, this is what the word of the Lord is. When the hand of the Lord came on me, this is what was going to happen. It happened just the way God said it would happen. And there was one town, Ker-Hareseth, that left standing, but men with slings surrounded it and attacked it. The king of Moab does make one valiant last-ditch effort to try to get through at least to the king of Edom, and he gets 700 men involved, and they failed. And once he saw he was defeated, he goes and does what? Kills his firstborn son as a sacrifice on the wall, and then goes home. And then that's the end of chapter 3. All right. Any questions so far? Which one of the chapters was more interesting to you guys? 2 or 3? 3? You know, I kind of hung on to 3 too. And it's probably because, and a lot of us who grew up in church learning Bible stories, we'd heard of the chariots of fire. We've heard of the whirlwind and heard of Elijah. We've heard of the bears. And we heard about how we respect men with bald heads, right? Most men. I used to have a cowlick right there. But this chapter 3 was fresh for me, because this is not something that what children's Bible story ever painted that scene? Maybe there is one. I don't know. Did y'all grow up with a children's story Bible with pictures like I did? Mom, what was the one we had that was, I know what Daniel looked like because it's pictured there, and what the lion's den looked like. There's Hurlburt's children's story Bible. There's maybe 2 or 3 others out there. This is not one of those that would have hit this. You got Jonah, you got Daniel, you got, the ark, Noah. This is not one of those that would hit the top 12 stories to tell kids. Well, because it looks like a bloodbath maybe. But it kind of hung on to me, especially that, I just love that phrase, it's an easy thing for the Lord. Say that with me. It's an easy thing for the Lord. Go home tonight and list 3 major problems going on in your life right now. It could be health, it could be financially related, it could be problems within your family members, it could be problems at work, it could be your neighbor, it could be obstinate people in your life that just keeps being in the way. And whatever you come up with, your 3, say it's an easy thing for God. This is an easy thing for God. This is an easy thing for God. To all 3 of those things. And it'll make you feel better. And if you don't feel like it, fake it till you make it. Okay? It may not happen overnight where you get all this confidence. I'm not saying that's a magic, enchanting statement that's going to make you feel pixie dust and tingling, but you keep saying that, you keep thinking that, it'll help you expect that. Did you know that you expect the things you think about and talk about? That's why if you only think about bad things happening and the worst case scenarios and you worry about this and that, what happens? Bad things happen in worst case scenarios, and that's what you focus on. If you're looking for the bad, you're going to find it. Isn't there something Jesus said that ask and you will, seek and you will find, and knock, and do you realize that that's good that's true for either whether you're asking for the good or asking for the bad. I mean, how many of you have been asking for trouble or ever did ask for trouble or looking for the negative and you found it? And you were kind of in places you didn't need to be. You were knocking on the doors of ill repute and you found it. You found the places. You do find what you're looking for, generally speaking. And that can be good and that can be bad. I feel like I'm preaching tonight. Why am I doing this? Y'all have to talk more. Any other comments? Chapter 2 or 3? Yes, David.
What do you make of the Moabite king sacrificing his son? Does that happen elsewhere?
Well, so the first thing that comes to mind, and since it is Moab, I tend to think that they worship Molech. And Molech was a god that you sacrificed your children through the fire for. He's not the only god, but that's the one that everybody tends to remember that, oh, that's the one they sacrifice their kids to. So this might have been out of, it's definitely flawed information he's going on about how his God and that system operates. Now, we do have this one little thing about he was supposed to be the heir to the throne. You remember that part? He was supposed to succeed him as king of Moab, but you just cut him off. Is there a hidden story in there we don't know about? Maybe he's blaming his son for maybe the strategy going wrong, and you let us, maybe he had a hand in that. And so if this is the way you were going to do it, I'm going to just kind of take you out here. But that's reading a lot into that we don't have. So there are a lot of dynamics there that could be there. Anybody else have anything just off the top of your head that you wanted to comment on? All right, things to ponder. Why did God take Elijah and Enoch in Genesis to heaven? You ever thought about that? How many people do you think have existed? And 2 got the death exemption. I mean, how many people are there on earth right now? I mean, that percentage has a lot of zeros after a decimal point, doesn't it? It's something I ponder. I know we think about this. Well, why think about it? Well, I'm just thinking, what was it about Enoch? What was it about Elijah that God would say, you know what? I'm going to take you out of that place. You're with me now. You get a front row seat from everything here on out to the birth of my son Jesus as a human being, to him dying on the cross, to being raised from the dead, and the early start of the church and all this. And by the way, Elijah, you're going to show up again. Now, we already talked about this a little bit, that Malachi talked about one would come in the spirit and the power of Elijah, and that's fulfilled with John the Baptist, right? There's another place Elijah appears again in the New Testament. Transfiguration scene. Now, where's Enoch? I don't know. It's Moses and Elijah that appear with Jesus when he's transfigured. And when Peter sees that, there's recognition of who these guys are as well as who Jesus is. And he says, let's build 3 shelters, one for each of you. As if, let's honor all 3. Then God says, this is my son in whom I'm pleased. Listen to him. But there's at least honorable mention for Elijah and Moses there. And Elijah is used as an example. I think in the book of James, he might be mentioned. Is he mentioned anywhere else besides in the Gospels when he's transfigured, or along with transfigured Jesus? or the book of James when he prays that it not rain and it doesn't, and then he prays that it does and it does? Is there any other mention of Elijah other than when Jesus asked his disciples, who do people say I am? And they were saying, well, some say you're Elijah. He appears, doesn't he? Why? Why not Abraham? Why not the man after God's own heart, David? Why didn't God take him? Well, I'm going to look at it, my newest elder in the church here. What thoughts do you... I know I'm just hitting this like really awkward, but... Yeah, wanting to die. That's interesting. It just dawned on me. He prayed to God to die, and he didn't. Which, God, that was a good one. That was a good one. That's interesting. I always thought it was interesting that he runs away because he's afraid to die, but then he's wanting to die. And now he doesn't know what death is. Even Jesus died. Wow. Even Jesus died. And he's called firstborn from the dead. Well, you might think, well, Elijah or Enoch, why aren't they? Well, they didn't die. They're not firstborn of the dead. So it's interesting, very interesting. How did the company of prophets know about Elijah's future, and why are they asking Elisha if he knows about it or not? Don't you know that your master is going to be taken from you today? Moving on. Why does Elisha tell them to be quiet about it? Yeah, I know, but don't say a word. It's almost like as he's walking along with Elijah, this is his mentor, and they come to him and say, don't you know that God's going to take him? Yeah, but it's a touchy subject right now. Don't say anything. He really wants to die. I'm conjecturing there. But that stuff gets interesting, and I think it's there because it's interesting. There's some reason why this is mentioned to us, and a reason why it happens 3 times. Because it happens twice where they're running up to Elisha and saying, don't you know God's going to take him? The ones from Jordan, that company of 50, what they want to do after the thing happens is, let's go looking for Elijah. Now that's interesting because the first 2 companies of prophets knew God was going to take him. This company of prophets think God's just putting him somewhere else. They search for 3 days and don't find him. They think maybe God put him on a mountaintop. Why is 50 a popular number among the company of prophets? Now, we're not told that the company of prophets from Bethel or Jericho were 50. We're told that the ones from Jordan is 50. But we've seen other 50 prophets mentioned in 1 Kings. That's interesting. Why is there so much elusiveness in the interactions between Elijah and Elisha? When I say that, that's kind of going back to, yeah, but don't say anything about it, his response to the prophets. It's like, stay here. God's telling me to go there. No, I'm going to go with you. Who did that remind you of, by the way? Huh? Peter? Ruth and Naomi was the one I was thinking of when Ruth says, am I going to remarry and have sons again, and y'all are going to wait till my sons get old enough to marry them again after their husbands had died, Naomi's sons? You leave. And Ruth says what? Wherever you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Guess what Ruth was? a Moabite. A Moabite, and is in the ancestry of Jesus. Right? So that's pretty cool how that ties in. When Elijah finally crosses the Jordan with Elisha, he kind of stops and says, "What can I do for you before God takes me?" It's almost like they haven't talked about this whole thing until they get to this point, and it's obvious that Elijah knows Elisha knows. Elisha knows that Elijah knows Elisha knows. All the prophets know. And then what is it that he asked for? I want a double portion of your spirit. I don't know about you, but I ponder, well, what was a portion? And how do you measure someone's spirit? And was this an egotistical thing for Elisha to ask for? I think after comprehensively knowing Elisha's ministry, I don't think it is, but you might at this point think, that's kind of arrogant that you want to be twice as good as I am. And I don't think Elisha is asking it that way, though, do y'all? I think Elisha is saying, I would just love to be able to do what you do and twice as much. Go ahead. A double portion, okay? Yeah. That could, I hadn't thought about that. That could be less than the spirit of Elijah himself. I was going to give you a portion, but I'll give you 2 portions, but not all of it. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. Okay. I'm learning. Ah. And we just talked about God. It's easy for God. Well, man, y'all ask good questions. I would think that, well, go ahead, Sam.
What kind of pops in my mind was perhaps is Elijah knew what difficult life he had.
Yeah.
Difficult it was to be a prophet.
His answer, because Jesus did the same thing. Can we have, what was the sons of Zebedee, the mom, who said, may James have your right and John your left, or was it vice versa? May my son sit on your right and left hand. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. Is this where he says foxes have holes? And something else, but the Son of Man has no stone to even lay his head. You remember that part? I don't know where that is. Well, it's in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, but that's a good point. You don't understand what you're asking there.
Be careful what you're asking for.
Exactly. Be careful what you're asking for. You really want that? You know, it kind of reminds me of people who get frustrated with God, who doubt God, and they're mad at God, who wants God to be fair. Why don't you be fair? I want to tell you something right now. I don't want God to be fair. I do not want God to be fair. I don't want to get what's coming to me, what I deserve. I don't want him to be fair. I want him to be merciful and full of grace. Amen. I don't want him to be fair. And to my knowledge, and I always will keep saying this till somebody can show me a verse that says otherwise, there's no verse that really says God's fair. It says God's just. There's a difference in that. God's just. But there's a lot of parables that kind of debunk the fair thing. The guy that was hired in the morning, midday, afternoon, evening, all got the same pay. Let me ask you, was that fair? It wasn't fair to the guy in the morning. Was it just? Each one of them got what the master said you're going to get. That's just. Didn't mean it's fair. I got sidetracked there a little bit. Thank you, Jeff, for bringing that all up. I've already kind of looked at number 8, so let's go to 9. Why does Elisha allow the prophets to go ahead and search for Elijah? He says, don't, and they keep insisting, so he says, okay. Huh? Yeah. So he can say, told you so. And why would the king of Moab sacrifice his own son? So we've already kind of talked about that. Let's look at discussion questions. What do we learn from Elijah? This is the last we see of him in the narrative. What do we learn from Elijah from tonight's denouement? What do we learn from Elijah? Or what do we learn from Elijah from the totality of what we've known and seen about Elijah? Would you say that he has moved his faith on to maturity from that time that he was hoping to die in the valley to this point here before he's taken up? Would you say he's grown? Would you say he's got more conviction? Yeah. He hasn't lost a trust factor with God. And what used to be scary for him to talk about, the Baal worshipers, Jezebel's reputation, all that stuff, is now pretty much like, why don't you ask your God that your dad asked about? Like, he's not afraid to do a little taunting here. That confidence level is going way up. Anything else that you learned from Elijah? What about Elisha? What do we learn from Elisha in this story tonight? These stories. But besides that, he's bald. Okay, besides that, besides not being wanting to be teased. I mean, that's good, but in addition to that, yeah? Sam? But here's your mentor, a lot of respect for him, and you're kind of his, he tells you to do something, you're supposed to do it, stay here. No, I don't want to. It's almost as if to the very end, I want to get as much from you as I possibly can, all the way to the end. And if he had not been persistent, if he had done what Elijah had first said, there would not have been the opportunity for him to have asked for a double portion of the Spirit. And there's something else interesting about this. And this is now dawned on me. Now, this may not have been Elijah, though, but do you all remember back from 1 Kings several weeks ago? This might have been Obadiah, but I think it might have been Elijah, I think it was Elijah who had gone to Obadiah. Obadiah was the one that had hidden the 2 groups of 50 prophets and 1 group in each cave. Remember that? This means yeah. Okay, or you're dozing off. This is where either prior to that or right after that, it said Elijah took a person with him from the company of the prophets, and he said, stay here. And the guy stayed put, and then he goes on. Y'all remember this? Yeah. I think eventually later he thinks that. But there's this little subtle thing like, you stay here, and then that guy's never even mentioned again. Yeah. I think that's part of the answer. Yeah. Stay here. Okay, go, And it's like, okay, you've gone with me this far. What can I do for you? So, yeah, you passed the test. Man, I'm running out of time. Why was the water flowing from the direction of Edom significant? I think that's because a desertous area where it'd be dry and arid, there'd be no water coming from there, but that's where it came from because God caused it to be. Why would Jehoshaphat agree to ally with Joram? That's a good question. It does seem that God's hand is in this allied three-king situation where it's going to end up involving Elijah, because this is what would be the motivating factor for Elijah to even get involved, was because of Jehoshaphat's involvement. Things to consider, this is the final points here. Always respect your elders, mentors, teachers. Always listen to the counsel of God. Don't ever make fun of someone who's bald or balding. Never assume that you have what it takes to go to a battle victorious, like I think the king of Moab thinks. He thinks he's got this. You got up, your men saw the water, they thought it was blood. It wasn't blood. They walked right into a trap. And I think of Jesus when he talks about the cost of discipleship. He says, he's telling us we need to count the cost of following him. And he gives two examples. Don't be like the man who set out to build a building but didn't calculate the cost and wasn't able to finish it. And don't be like the king who went to war without first weighing the odds to see if he could win that war. That's kind of paraphrasing that. But you need to discern your moves. And I think we can totally confidently say we have the victory, but we better check out the strategy and make sure that we're not walking into traps, because Satan's really good about setting those traps. Any final thoughts? All right, we'll go ahead and sign off from our YouTube and Facebook. Thanks for joining us.